Thank you. All right, amazing. So I have to say, I just want to follow on from Richard, and it's quite interesting because I have to say my nickname by my colleagues within the Institute of Education is Tigger. And the reason it's Tigger is because I am just that little bit crazy. So it was quite nice and very refreshing for me to see somebody who was just as animated in their presentation as I am. So I actually feel that maybe you won't be surprised by the energy that we bring, myself and Kerry-Ann. In fact, I think we are not as energetic as Richard, but hopefully we can still keep this interesting for you. All right, so the aims of our session today is to primarily try and help you to maybe take a more empathic view of the looked after children. I think it's easy for us to say that, we have a level of empathy as educators, as social workers, as students of children who are looked after. But again, it's a different story to put ourselves into that position, to that mindset of that young person. So one of the key things we are going to focus on today is identity, and the identity of that young person who is looked after. As part of that identity, we are going to ask you all who are joining us here today to take part in your own journey with us. So we are going to encourage you on a journey through what it feels like to be that looked after child. So we will be asking you to contribute into the chat when we give you instructions to do so. Kerry-Ann, don't know if you want to add anything more to that before we move on to the first slide.
I'd just like to sort of reiterate what you've just said, Becky, that I think what I'd like you all to get from this is just to get a different perhaps viewpoint or a different sort of perspective on the looked after child and how we actually support and view the looked after child, and perhaps to allow yourselves to put yourself in their shoes just for a short amount of time this morning to increase your empathy, but just to make sure that we can actually look at the whole child. But I think it's really important that we look at this perhaps from, and I hope that you get to take away from this a bit more of an understanding of some of the issues that perhaps you don't perhaps feel as relevant at the point in time now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kerry-Ann. Is it possible for us to move on to the About You slide, if possible? Brilliant. So just some quick questions here, and feel free to share any of the responses in the chat that you would like to. I think one of the things Kerry-Ann and I can see already in our of the participants, we can see a lot of your names already, so that's really good. I just want you to take a pause, and if you've got pen and paper sat next to you, could you just spend the next maybe 30 to 60 seconds answering some of these questions about yourself? What was your date of birth? Just write it down. If you want to share it with us, if you're brave enough, like Richard, he shared these in his 50th years. I'm 44, I'll be coming up to 45. So I was born in that summer of 1976, so I'm a May baby, so I was born into a heat wave. Any of you who want to share that in the chat, please feel free to do so, but just take a couple of seconds to write down some of the answers for yourself. I shall be quiet for a couple of seconds while you do that. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to just make some notes. Thank you to those who, we have a September 76. So you were the year below me. I was at in the year above you at school? So, oh, somebody in my year group at school. 76 seems to be a popular year for our group. That's brilliant. All right, so could we move it on to the next slide, if that's all right? All right, so this is where our journey begins for all of you here today. So what I'd like to do is for you to take who you are as it stands, and I'd like you to put it to one side and put it in a box emotionally, and I'd like to give you a new identity. I'm going to take you through this journey of a new identity. So I want you to imagine, very difficult, especially for those of you like me who were born in 1976, I want you to go back and I want you to imagine that you are a 4-year-old little child. Now, male, female, whichever. So you are 4 years of age. At the present time, at the age of 4, you currently live with your biological parents in Surrey. Now, Surrey's a beautiful place. I've been there myself. It's a lovely, it's warmer than where I come from, which is Newcastle, and it's lovely. And there's a lot of friendly people there, lots of greenery. So you live with your biological parents in Surrey. And your biological parents are the first part of your microsystem, as we call it. So they are the surrounding family members for you. Now, there are lots of interactions within this microsystem. So we have our parents, we have a little sister for you. School is also part of your microsystem. So you are in reception at the moment. So you have friends at school, you have interactions with a class teacher, and your best friends at school. I mean, these two girls are, they're mad, they're crazy. They're called Josie and Faye. And you, Josie and Faye, have this amazing little kitty group that you call yourselves, and you do everything together when you're at school. So I just want you to imagine that that's your life right now. Just take a second to think about what it feels like to be 4, to have a mum and a dad, to have a little sister, to have these best friends and this teacher at your school. So your first year in formal education. So just take a second to think about that. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to add a little bit of context to your family, this family that we've just described on the previous slide. So your younger sister is called Jane, and Jane is 3 years of age. Unfortunately for you, you do have a disadvantaged home life. So the relationship between your mother and your father is not positive, and the school are concerned about issues of domestic violence and also issues around parental substance misuse, in particular with alcohol. School have notified social services because of concerns of, regularly seeing mum on the playground, maybe not in, a fit state. And obviously as a 4-year-old, disclosing lots of information in general conversation. So social services have recently removed you and your sister, and you've been placed into a short-term foster home. Now, as we know, there is a desperate shortage for foster carers and foster homes at the moment, and has been for some time. So unfortunately, your sister is having to be placed in a different home to you. Now, you are separated for the first time, so you are now no longer living with your parents, your biological parents, and you're no longer with your sister, albeit you will still see your family on visits. Now, social services have made you very physically safe, but they are desperately trying to encourage your parents to overcome these difficulties so that you can be placed back in the safety of a home with parents who you can identify with. Unfortunately, that hasn't been successful, and your parents, unfortunately, have made decisions and lifestyle choices that are placing you at risk, and therefore social services, after a period of time, have decided that the best plan for you and for your little sister is that you are given the opportunity to a better life. So therefore you will be placed for adoption. You will remain in foster care, but with the view for adoption. Kerry-Ann.
Yes, thank you. What I'd just like to add there, if it's possible, is just to draw a line there for a moment and to think on you as a child now, and to add your name into the chat, your first name and your surname, your current name, your actual name into the chat. So your first name and your surname. So if you could all just spend a minute or so just adding your names into the chat, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So on one of the previous slides, we looked at, what is your name? And obviously our name forms part of our identity. You may have been named by a family member. You may have a name of a grandmother, for instance. So your identity is your name. Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Kerry-Ann. Can we move on to the next slide, please? All right, so let's fast forward by 2 years, and you are now 6 years of age. After 2 foster placements, you have now been placed for adoption. So you had your short-term foster placement while the assessment was made. You were placed into long-term foster care while they tried to find a forever home for you. Now, your new family members. Now, these are beautiful people, Mr. and Mrs. Brown. How exciting. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, they don't live in Surrey, unfortunately. And due to a lot of the issues that come with the family, the biological family, the decision has been taken to move you out of the actual county for safety reasons. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Brown are lovely. They've got 2 beautiful Old English sheepdogs, Elsa and Pepper. They also have a cat, long-haired cat called Fluff. And they live in a lovely place called Birmingham. And I don't know if any of you've been to Birmingham, but it is, again, like Surrey, it's another place that's lovely. Has a slightly different accent, just a slightly different accent, but all the same, they still, you can still understand somebody from Birmingham like you can understand me from Newcastle. So, because you are 6, you are now in year 2, you're going into year 2, and you're going to be living in Birmingham with this new family, and you're also going to have a new school, which means you get some new friends. Now, the formal adoption takes a little bit of time due to the fact that, legalities, the getting consent from parents and all those other technicalities that come along with it. So your formal adoption doesn't actually take place until your 8th birthday. So what I want you to do is just pop into the chat. How do you feel right now? I mean, I feel really excited for you. You've got this new area, these new dogs and the cat. Mr. and Mrs. Brown are lovely people, clearly, because they've been approved for adoption. And you're going to have all these new friends at the new school who are going to be so fascinated by you. So if you could just pop into the chat, how do you feel about this? Okay, so, we don't sound so excited. We don't sound as excited as I am. So we got scared, uncertain, apprehensive, out of place. Julia's angry. Okay, so I'm confused now. I've just seen that we've got one there, a few saying confused. So I'm slightly confused because, as a social worker, I'm quite excited about the fact that you're going to be completely physically safe in your new home, I think, or you should be. All right, Kerry-Ann, over to you.
Thank you. There was a comment from Emma. Thank you, Emma. The comment was a different person, and this links in quite nicely because the definition of identity is, especially for a child, it's who you are. It's who we've been and who we will actually eventually become. But for a child to start to think about their identities, who am I? Where do I fit in? And moving and being adopted and living with Mr. and Mrs. Brown now with the dogs and the cats, it's very different sort of who am I scenario than the house that you've left. Why am I here is also another question the child might ask, just to sort of understand their own identity. And it's quite interesting to think that a lot of people in the chat have put uncertain, apprehensive, out of place. Again, all of these words which will hinder a child to actually develop their identity at this point in their lives. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we move on to the next slide, please? All right, what I would like you to do just very quickly before we move on to the update, I'd like you to pop into the chat your first name and your new name. So your name followed by your new surname. Your new surname, guys, is Brown. Brown. So I'm going to pop into the chat now my new name. I am Beccie Brown. Oh, no, I'm not. I've spelled Brown wrong. Silly me. Can we all pop into the chat on new surname? I'm Beccie Brown. Hi, Alison Brown. Ed Brown, welcome. Russell Brown, brilliant. Chris Brown. Hi, Ruth Brown. This is amazing. We've got so many in our family now, Kerry-Ann. All right, Colin Brown. Hi. Carly Brown. Okay, so just, have we got everybody? Brilliant. So just quickly, how does that feel having that new name? It's amazing, isn't it? Anybody want to pop into the chat? How do they feel about their new name? Alien Jenny, okay. Rebecca, that's Chris says it's uncomfortable. It's not you, Holly, but it is you. This is your new family. They are your forever family, as we describe them. Yeah, it's been forced upon you. So what, Penny, I'm just going to come back to that point about being forced on you. So we are advocates. You know, we as a country, as institutions, we are signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And we advocate for children as teachers, as social workers. We advocate for our children and we give our children a voice. And Carly, it's interesting you said strange, and Penny has said that it's been forced upon her, but surely we are giving children a voice here. And your identity, you know, your identity, what is that built upon? Is your identity based on something as simple as a name? So just by changing your name, has that changed your identity? So there's lots of things to think about here as your new name. So I would like you to keep this name for the rest of today, if that's all right. I'd like you to think, you know, throughout the rest of the day, if you sign anything, you know, if you write anything down, just think about writing down your name with that new surname. Just see if you can do it for the rest of today. It's good to see Sue Brown that you've got your maiden name back. That's interesting. And Ali, your history has been erased. But we are giving you a new physically safe home. So, you know, it's interesting you say that it's erased because you do get an opportunity as that 6-year-old to say goodbye to your family. Yeah, you have a final farewell contact where you meet your mother, your father, and your siblings possibly, and then this is the last time you're going to see them, and the next time you can possibly see them is when you're 18 if you choose to find them. So now you get to say goodbye, so that's a good thing, surely. And hopefully that your social worker has provided you with a lovely book or a box filled with all these amazing memories from your biological family. Yeah. I think we see here, Julia said, glad I can blend a bit now at school. All right, so, and where did the tailor go? The tailor literally is no longer your legal name, unfortunately, Kate. When you're adopted, your birth certificate that you have right now, before we gave you this new name, that birth certificate is no longer legal. You are therefore given a brand new birth certificate. I mean, how cool is that to have 2 birth certificates? But you get a brand new birth certificate at the age of 8 once the judge signs off on the adoption, and your new birth certificate will have Mr. and Mrs. Brown there as your parents. So that's your new document. So as an adult, when you apply for your driving license or your passport or any kind of ID, you will need to present your new birth certificate, not your old one, because that's no longer legal. So that's where your name's gone. All right, so I'm just going to take another fast forward. So we know we've been adopted at 8. We are now at 15 years of age. And due to ongoing physical abuse within that family home, you do not feel safe. So at 15, you're left with the only option to keep you safe, and that is to run away for the final time. So yes, as a 15-year-old, you know, you run away a number of times, a bit like Richard. You know, Richard mentioned about running and sleeping in porta cabins. Again, the same, sleeping in fields, sleeping under bridges, you know, running away quite frequently, but every time being returned by the police, because Mr. and Mrs. Brown are lovely people, you know, they're very nice people. So why would you want to run away? But at 15, you decide, that's it, I'm done, I'm running away permanently. And because you're 15, you're not old enough, obviously, to look after yourself. So you then enter the looked after system. So you become a looked after child once again. You're placed in a 15-bed care home for assessment. So just over a weekend, just so they can check, you know, what's the system? Are we going to send them back home? Are you going to be here for the long haul? So it's decided that actually it doesn't look like we can send you back to your adoptive family. So we'll move you into a short stay children's home just so we can assess you for a period of 12 weeks and see where we need to go from there. Again, you know, within that 12 weeks, you're made to go home back to the adoptive parents because they're lovely people, remember. They live in very nice affluent area. They have lots of, you know, they have lots of money and they're very well educated. So they're nice people. It doesn't work out. So it's decided by social services that we need to put you into a more permanent position. So we put you into a care home that allows you to stay there for a longer period of time until you're ready to leave care. And at 17, this is the exciting bit. At 17, you get to leave care and you get to move into your own flat. So your own little flat. How amazing is that? It's 17. It's so excited. I'd be so excited. So what I'd like you to do is just pop into the chat quickly before or as I'm handing over to Kerry. Could you just pop into the chat? How do you feel right now? 17, about to leave care and get your own flat. So Jenny said she's overwhelmed. Carly feels a little bit abandoned, terrified, nervous. 17 and getting to go independent. That's exciting, isn't it? Free. Yeah, how will you afford it? Yeah, that's a good point because you're not legally an adult, are you? Somebody said buzzing. All right, yeah, somebody's on my plate. You're with me. Cattle, how has this been better than being with my family? Yeah, I get that. Happy to have my own place, so initial excitement. Kerry-Ann, I'm going to hand over to you at this point.
Thank you. There's some really lovely comments coming through. Cattle, how has this been better than being with my family? And I think, Russell, to answer that, it depends really on the individual, but perhaps what family they've left. And we've got my own place, initial excitement. And I think the key there is initial excitement. I'm with Becky here on this feeling that actually I'm going to be independent. I'm going to have my own place. Might not be anything in there yet. I might have to look through the Argos catalogue to start looking. But again, we don't know if it's real. And I think with the upbringing that you've had so far, when you were 4, 8, and now 15, is this real? Is your independence real? Is what you're doing now real? So that's a good point. And thank you, Julia. Liberated. I think that's an excellent word, actually, liberated. You've made a good point here. My own money and some funding to pick my furniture. But again, where would you pick your furniture from? Yeah, how would you go about that? Yeah, if you're 17 and a care leaver, what support do you think's there available to help you to fund or to sort of allow you to be independent in your first place? So we get support from care worker, aftercare worker.
Higher education grants, yeah. Okay. And that's an interesting point, Rebecca, because obviously at 17 years of age and with the change in our law around the age we stay in education, actually we should still be in education until we're 18. So, you know, suddenly that you as this 17-year-old are responsible for getting yourself out of bed every day and getting yourself to school every day. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because you've still got at least 1 year left of the education system. So there's lots of support out there. That's amazing. So we can get some financial support. Obviously, we can't access any kind of, you know, how can I put it, benefits. We can't access any benefits as yet because we're not old enough legally to do that. So we're very reliant on the goodwill of other people. And how much do we need to have? So one of the things I would like to just bring to the table for this one is at 17, there are different types of looked after children. You can either be accommodated by the local authority and you can also be on a full care order. And those of you who work in social work will know this. So where you're placed on a full care order, the local authority is legally responsible for you. And therefore, if you were on a full care order, yes, you would have a lot more support up to the age of 25. And that includes financial support. Now, a lot of the children that we see in the looked after system are actually accommodated. So the legal responsibility remains with the parents. and the financial responsibility does not necessarily follow through up to the age of 25 for those children who are only accommodated. So that can be a grey area for a lot of children, and unfortunately for you at 17, you're accommodated.
Can I just say something? Working in leaving care, that's not quite right.
Okay, that's fine.
Because young people obviously can be Section 20 accommodated, but can still qualify to become eligible to be a care leaver post 18. So they would still be financially supported in other ways, and would then be entitled to a leaving care service 18 to 21 and then up to 25. It's if young people have been accommodated and don't reach to do with their 16th birthday, where then post 18 they become qualifying care leavers, which financially and the support with the advice and guidance from leaving care is quite different.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So when the case study that we're looking at here, the looked after accommodation, so that support post leaving care is available, as in, you know, they can access grants, can access funding.
But we're financially responsible for them though till 18 anyway. So it's post, so they're not care leavers necessarily at 16, 17.
They're not care leavers, as in, yes, you're right. So you're financially responsible to the age of 18, because obviously that's when they become adults. But obviously the difference between an accommodated child after 18 and a full care order after 18, as you've said, you know, that can be different. In what
only if you're eligibility and your status, but you can still be Section 20 accommodated and still be a care leaver and receive, as a former relevant child, receive a full leaving care service post 18. It's if you're a qualifying child, then becomes post 18, that's where it's different.
Okay,
and
again,
the Children Leaving Care Act will tell you that.
Yeah, it's a very complicated system, unfortunately. For this young person, obviously being accommodated, the support was there for you guys at 17 from different organisations. In fact, one of the organisations that you were able to access was the Prince's Trust, which I think is really important to recognise that there are lots of charitable organisations out there that also support or looked after children. Okay, could we move on to the next slide? Is that all right? Kerry-Ann, I'm going to hand over to you if you wanted to add to that.
Hi, yeah, just to add into this, we're looking at statistics, and I'd like you to think about you as a 17-year-old, being independent for the first time perhaps, and living independently. But really what I'd like you to do is just take a moment just to look through some of these statistics, because compared to the general population, care leavers are less likely to be in education, employment or training. Okay, so these are quite stark statistics. Over a third of 19-year-old care leavers are not in education, employment or training, NEET. More likely to be attempting to live independently, with some not even being able to sort of stay there in their placements beyond the age of 18. In terms of living independently, it's quite difficult for a child that perhaps had experiences of living in foster care or being being raised in care and experiencing care to actually maintain that independence. Okay, so the experiences that they perhaps have might hinder them in actually maintaining that and the transition as well. Statistics also state that care leavers are more likely to have a criminal conviction and may have experienced unnecessary criminalisation themselves. And the shocking, statistics that care leavers are estimated to represent between 24 and 27% of the adult population, prison population. So with that in mind, I just want you to take a minute now to think about you going through this case study in this life. What do you think now that your life would look like for you when you're now age 20? Okay.
If you could just pop that into the chat, where do you think you are right now at the age of 20?
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep an eye on the chart. Where do we think you might be?
What do you think you'd be doing? Would you be in a
so
in a job?
Unemployed, no future prospects. Some do well, some don't. You're right, Rebecca. That's exactly right. And again, as you've mentioned already, you know, it's really important to recognise that there is financial support there for these young people looked after. So surely, if we have that financial support available to us, then we should succeed, should we not? Trying to survive, finding any relations I can, healthy or otherwise. Looking for work, yeah. So yeah. Finding, and that's a really interesting one to point out. Looking for relationships, you know, healthy or otherwise. And I think it's interesting to note that a lot of people, you know, where people have experienced these kinds of backgrounds, you're right there, they do look for relationships because they're looking for a family, you know. And what does a family look like? Well, a family can sometimes just be the physicality of having a loved one near you, and that could be you having your own children, you know, that could be, you know, entering into relationships just for the security of having somebody, and that doesn't necessarily always mean it's healthy. Julia, seeking support for mental health and well-being. Again, you know, this is something we're going to talk about a lot in this session. So what I want to do is just to say thank you for, you know, your contributions. Can I just ask you all quickly to pop your name into the chat again for me? I'm going to pop mine in again. Brilliant, Rebecca. Yes, amazing. I might spell my name right this time. I should be used to it. I've had it since I was 8. Excellent. All right, so thank you for that. And Kerry-Ann's pointed out some really interesting things about these statistics. So, you know, when we go back, let's revisit what Richard said in the keynote speech. You know, Richard talked very much about having dysfunctional relationships. He wasn't successful in relationships. He had that experience of criminality, you know, because he wasn't able to make those right choices for whatever reason. And, you know, so a lot of the things that Richard has talked about in the keynote speech, we are seeing them here in these statistics. And I think one of the things that, you know, I would like to bring to your attention is we've had this little discussion about, yes, we financially support these children until they're 18 or possibly 25 in a lot of instances. And is that it? Is that all we need to do? Is all we need to do is make these children physically safe? So we've removed them from harm. We removed you all from your, you know, your dysfunctional family with, you know, witnessing domestic violence. As someone who teaches psychology, I'm very aware of the damage that shouting to children can have on the brain. You know, we know these through our neuroscientific understanding now. We know the damage that's caused. So that was the right thing to do, is to remove you from that physical harm. You were placed into a wonderful family who've gone through a process. They've ticked all the boxes. They've provided you a beautiful physical home, animals, you know, they've given you clothing, they've done everything. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. That family didn't turn out to be that stabling force that you needed. You have ended up back in the care system, and you have been placed into children's homes where you were hopefully physically safe. And you've been given your own accommodation. So again, financially, we've given you accommodation. Financially, we've supported you. Now, what does that life look like at 20? I think it's safe to say that actually a lot of you weren't too sure that it would be that positive. Okay, Chris, working in a supermarket, not that there's anything wrong with working in a supermarket, but again, you know, when you think about education, I had this conversation with my children about the importance of education. Not just, you know, not just for their life chances, but also for the social interactions, you know, and for teachers to be those advocates for those children. So,
can I just say though, I've worked in leaving care for like 20-25 years, and my particular role in my service is about education, training, and employment. And actually, if we've got young people who their life experiences and are working in a supermarket and are contributing and are economically active, maintain their accommodation, are part of society, then some of those young people have done extremely well. Mm-hmm. And we always have aspirations for our vulnerable young people, don't get me wrong, but we need to move away from constantly thinking that always all those young people that have, that working is a massive, massive achievement. And along that way, they might start at the bottom in that supermarket again, and it might stay like that. And there's nothing wrong in that. And they progress and they are part of society. And the answer for lots of our young people isn't always the traditional academic university route, because working and training for lots of young people, and lots of young people successfully move on. So we need to have a balance about kids that do work and have a very good work ethic and contribute.
I absolutely agree with you, Rebecca. And as I said, there's absolutely nothing wrong in working in a supermarket. Absolutely not. But again, what we have to be very mindful of is what are the life opportunities for a lot of our young children, should we consider other elements of their lives as they go through.
That's the important thing, isn't it? Because part of any particular, some jobs, there are opportunities to carry on training and learning. Lots of young people decide, again, they can get to 24 and want to go to uni and want to start training or want to do a GCSE maths and English because they've not been able to achieve it at the milestones or the expected chronological ages they were supposed to achieve those things. So again, that young person might work then part-time in a supermarket but might return into education, and then we look at financial support and practical support to enable that to happen as part of our service in leaving care.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like you said, you've worked in leaving care for 25 years, so, you will be aware very, I'm sure more aware than a lot of people of the changes that we've seen in the, the availability to support young people looked after. So what I will do is I'll just give you a quick, you mentioned about university, that's interesting because, this case study, as young people yourselves at the age of 20, you had the opportunity to go to university. You were independent, you had your flat, you managed to maintain a job after school and, doing your A-levels. It's interesting, this case study, I haven't put a slide on there with this, but, university was an option for you in this case study. But unfortunately, the course that you wanted to do was to be a primary teacher and specialise in art and dance. And the only university that was available to you was Chichester University. Now, that's difficult because obviously you are in a local authority accommodation, you have your own flat, and to be able to go away to university and do the course that you want to do sometimes can be limiting because who is going to pay and maintain that flat in your absence for you to then be able to come back? So that in this case study, that young person, you were not able to take that opportunity purely because you didn't have anywhere to come home to. You didn't have that family or, those people around you to come back to out of term time. So that's where we're at the minute. And I just thought I'd add that in because I think it's a really interesting thing that you've raised about opportunity to education. So what I will say to you now is, I'll tell you where that person is. I'm going to pop it into the chat where this person is right now. And it's me. This is me. So I have just taken you through a journey as a senior lecturer for Nottingham Trent University, working within Institute of Education, and you have just lived my experience. So hopefully the idea of this, workshop, this looked after, looked over, it comes with two elements. And I think, for myself, listening to Richard this morning, he may as well have talked about elements of my life, although my life certainly hasn't been as traumatic as his, there are definitely elements of his life where he talked very much about, emotional safety. And I think this is the big thing that we need to recognise, that there's a lot of discussion here around financial stability, giving children opportunity for finance, giving children the opportunity to a safe environment, to a safe home. But Richard touched on this repeatedly. He talked about the fact that where was the emotional support? Where was the therapy? Where was there anybody, assessing his emotional well-being? And granted, as children, it may be that's not the time we want that help, because like he said, he became quite angry. And, his life course, his life sentence is his childhood. And for many of us, our life sentence is our childhood. We didn't ask for these childhoods, but we are given them. And unfortunately, I think this is the one thing that Kerry-Ann and I wanted to try and help you understand is, you know, we do look after our children in the care system, but we also look over them. And I'm not saying every social worker, every teacher looks over a child, but it's very important that what children really do need is to be listened to, is to help somebody understand, help them understand what's happening for them. Because, you know, when we remove children from harm, we think they're okay. We think removing them from that harm should make them safe. Yes, it does physically, but does it emotionally? And what I would say to you is, you know, if 44 years of age, I am with Richard, this is a life sentence. To this day, to this very day I'm sitting here now presenting to you, my childhood, my dysfunctional childhood that I didn't ask for is being used against me. You know, if you think about every time you register a child's birth, you have to present your birth certificate. You have to give your birth name, your maiden name. My maiden name is my adoptive name. It's not my birth name. So what I would hope that you take from this is when we talk about looking after children, there is a big difference between looking after children and looking over children. So that's where I'm going to hand over to Kerry-Ann. Thank you very much for listening to or even experiencing this kind of study. You are quite welcome to take your old name back, by the way, guys. Kerry-Ann, over to you.
Thank you, Beccie. I'd just like to spend a few minutes just giving you a bit of a background to my life, and it is slightly different to Beccie's. I was born to a single mother in my first home was a homeless shelter. My background was very, heavily in poverty. We were squatting illegally when I was 3 years old, whilst my mum was pregnant with my younger sister. I went to 4 different primary schools. I was on the at-risk register through most of my life, if not all. And I did have to spend quite a few times in temporary foster placements because of my mother's medical issues and my mother's partners that she had on and off. There are no photos of me under the age of 7, and I only have one when I was 7. And I had to take lots of time off school to look after my mum, who has Munchausen's and an alcoholic, to look after my other siblings that came 10, 11 years after I was born. When I was 15, I decided to run away and sleep in a field, which I didn't realise at the time was actually behind a police station in Derby. So the police found me and took me to a residential home. So I stayed there. And what was surprised me was a lot of the girlfriends that I had there, that I made there, really wanted to have their own family, just like Beccie reiterated earlier. They wanted somebody to care for. So a lot of the girlfriends that I made ended up falling pregnant quite early. And quite young, and a lot of the boyfriends that I made there, some of which ended up going to Glen Parva. This was at the time a Young Offenders Institute. I think it's now closed in Leicester. We mentioned birth certificate. On my birth certificate, I don't have a father's name listed. I just have a line. So I can't actually tell you what my father's name is. When I left the children's home, I ended up going into a hostel and a mother and baby unit. In this hostel, it was for both men and women in Normanton, which is in Derby, and it's not the nicest. But I did manage to get accommodation through a housing association, but I had no furniture, no carpets, no curtains. And at that time, because I couldn't prove that I was over 11 weeks pregnant or that I had a probation officer, I couldn't actually claim any money, financial support to help furnish my new flat. So I ended up going to lots of charity shops, but also went to Family First, which at the time was a charity that helped people like myself, to furnish their houses. Going back to what Richard said earlier, I had one teacher at school, Mrs. Bangu, I'll always remember her, my English teacher, and she always told me, and she told me this after I got a report saying that I was factory fodder. She always told me that education is one way for me to get out of this cycle that I was trapped in. And going back to what Rebecca, what you mentioned earlier, I was just thankful to have a job. At that time, I didn't have qualifications as I do now. I was just thankful to get a job, and I was quite happy. And as Rebecca mentioned, there's a lot of people, care leavers, that are happy doing that. It wasn't until I was a little bit older that I realised that actually I wanted to go to university. And as Rebecca, you mentioned again, I actually went to university when I was 26. And at that time I felt ready, but I did lose a lot of my colleagues and friends from my sort of working class background and from my jobs, because they thought that I was trying to be better than them, that I was trying to sort of aim above my station. So that's a really good point. So thank you for bringing that up, Rebecca. But I think going back to development of identity, I learned very quickly as a young child that if you develop more than one identity, you can fit in almost anywhere. And I was almost like a chameleon. In all the houses I went to and all the different, people I spoke to in different groups and different school classes and so on, I learned very quickly to develop different identities and to fit in. Now, this is almost like a survival instinct for me to actually do that. And I had lots and lots of identity, sort of definitions of my own identity. But I think the main thing for me is, based on our individual circumstances, we all develop different identities. Of course, we're mother, student, worker, colleague, and so on. But I think for me, having experience of being in care and my background, I had to develop them a lot earlier than most. So I think in terms of those that have experienced foster or adopted care, identity is particularly important. And part of that identity is knowing where you're from. And this links into what Becky mentioned earlier. I don't necessarily know where I'm from. With my mother being an alcoholic and has been for many, many years, with her also having Munchausen's, we can't take anything that she tells us with, well, let's just say we have to take it with a grain of salt. So not everything is, so we can't actually ask her. So my family history is non-existent. And I think that sort of, even though I feel at the moment that my experiences and where I am now, and I want to hope to inspire other people to think, well, actually, I'm not a statistic. I am not going to be on that last slide. But I think it's also important that it is a life sentence, and these emotions that you had in your younger years do tend to, at various times in adulthood, tend to creep up and sort of knock you on your back a little bit. And I think, this emotional safety, I always felt particularly physiologically safe, but I think emotionally safe, it was never an option. I just had to take day by day and just survive. And I still carry that now into adulthood. And I very much believe that actually, even though I am where I am now, it's still a little bit in, a life sentence that every so often I do think back and I almost revert back to that emotional state I was in when I was younger. Okay. But saying that now, I am so happy, and just reiterating what Richard says, that, I am extremely resilient. I look for the silver lining in everything. I'm very, very sort of optimistic. And that's a really good point, because nothing is going to get me down. With everybody telling me in my childhood, you'll end up like your mother, why do you want to go to college, you're factory fodder, that I actually turned that round and thought, right, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I think what we need to do, and I'm sure that you're doing this with the young people, is be an advocate for them to say, yes, you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerry-Ann. Again, amazing story. It always hits me hard when I hear that story. Again, guys, we'd love you to ask any questions. I think the key message for us here from Kerry-Ann and I is we are the lucky ones, we are the resilient ones. Like Richard, we did survive. I have to say, you know, of the children I was in care with, not many survived. A lot of them did go under the metro or did have overdoses, or in some instances, the Tyne Bridge was a favourite spot. We don't all succeed, and it is a life sentence for us all. So what I would say is, you know, please do think about the emotional safety and the future of the children, not just their financial stability. So any questions, please feel free to ask myself or Kerry-Ann. We're happy to open up the floor to any questions.
Do you want us to unmute or do you want us to type?
Unmute, fine, Kate. Kate, that's absolutely great. Someone else's voice other than ours.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to ask if you had, I mean, thank you for sharing, you know, and such inspiration, you know, such resilience. So thank you. If you had some advice for teachers and social workers, if there was something you could say as a 4-year-old, as a 6-year-old, as a 15-year-old, as a 19-year-old, you know, what would it be? I know there's probably a lot, but if there was something you could summarise, one word for them to take home.
I think one word, and as Chris will know, who's with us today, our director, you know, my research is driven by child voice and subjective, you know, voice of children. It's to listen. And, you know, what's important to you as a social worker, what's important to you as a teacher is very different to what's important to us as a child. And when I say listen, it's about listening, you know, it's not listening with that view to respond. It's actually listen and feel what's important to that child. You know, all too often those little things are so important to us, and that's what gives us our resilience. But actually those are the things that you guys sometimes don't always see. So, you know, it's not easy to advocate for children. We get that. But, you know, just please keep advocating for those amazing children, because they are our future.
Can I just add as well, I think what's really important for me is to have positive relationships with teachers. And I think for a teacher to acknowledge your background and your identity, but not necessarily keep going back to that and just see you as your background or as your life circumstances, but to actually see that child as somebody that can actually inspire and go on to do lots of things. You're not defined by your past, even though it's part of your identity. I think you just have to have one person, in my case, Mrs. Bangu, who told me I could. Yes. And I just wanted, because of the relationship I had with her, and she saw me, that I wanted to prove her right.
Yes, thank you.
Can I just say, anybody who would like to look at this a little bit more, there is I'm going to pop it into the chat. We don't have time to watch it, but there is a series on YouTube which can be used. It's an amazing teaching resource, and if you just type in Removed, there are, I think the social workers that we present to are aware of this, but as a teacher, it's an amazing resource. There are 3 episodes. The first 2, you know, one's 8 minutes and one's 12 minutes.
Can I just, sorry, I'm just responding. I've just seen Julia. I've just seen a question there. Can I ask what support you were offered for mental health and wellbeing? I wasn't actually offered any support. So when I was 18, 19, I think I was, my GP tried to prescribe me Prozac at the time. And that was a little bit too late. Yeah, and I think with young people, support needs to be there before we can take it and hang it around our necks when we go into adulthood. But no, I wasn't.
Yeah, and I think you'll see my response there. Again, I wasn't given any opportunity for any help. If anything, actually, working at NTU, I was given the opportunity to apply for a wellbeing project. It was a piece of research that was done by NTU in 2019. And as part of that, I was given a psychotherapist. And I do feel sorry for that lady, because to this day, you know, I think 42 years of, you know, upheaval came out in that wellbeing project, and that was only 6 sessions. But, you know, it was NTU that gave me that opportunity, but it did open a lot of doors. So, you know, yeah, at 42, nothing, but thankfully I did get something from NTU in the end.
Thank you, ladies. Sorry, I couldn't find how to unmute my mic. I'm the same as you. I'm used to Teams, not Zoom. And I'm very passionate about mental health and wellbeing, and we're doing so much in schools now for that. And I am an ELSA, and thank the world for ELSAs for these children, far and wide. But I think, you know, we've got to get to the other end where, you know, those children that weren't in the fortunate positions to have what we have got in schools now, that will have missed that, they need picking up. Because all I'm seeing where we're working with young adults and beyond are that if they need, well, they need it, but to get it, they're having to pay for it, and that is another huge barrier. Great results if you can do that. So, you know, this is a challenge we've got at the moment.
And Julia, to be fair, you know, a lot of the children that we see in education today, they're not part of the looked after system, but they're suffering the same problems. And I think this is the challenge for us all, you know, you know, as Kerry-Ann said, a lot of these children, they mask it. They have this smiling depression. You know, children present very happy, but actually when we listen to them, if we give them the opportunity to be heard, it's a very different story.
Absolutely, and that's why it's got to be a whole school approach. And everybody needs that opportunity to talk. I just, again, wished we had more financial support to be able to have, you know, more, more readily available.
I think we all do. I have popped in there the name of the video if you do want to have a look on YouTube. It's called Removed, and Julia, it's a great resource to use, you know, with training staff to try and get some empathy to understand children. It is a dramatisation, but it's the most accurate you'll find. But it's really great. So can I just say thank you to all of you who've attended and taken this journey with us. I hope that you leave with maybe, you know, just a little bit more of an understanding of what it is to be looked over and not just looked after.
So I just want to say thank you to Beccie and Kerry-Ann for sharing that and running us through that session. That was great. It's now 12 o'clock, so we'll go back to the final third session. So if you go to your programme, there's a link in the final part. So if people want to log off and head over there now, that'd be great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.